I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in California and Washington. And I am also a SoulCollage facilitator. To me, SoulCollage is witch work. I think healing is witch work. I think a lot of creative people are witches, and not everybody identifies as a witch, but I have come to that place in my life. I run a monthly SoulCollage group, and I also am a soul memory discovery practitioner, which means when I do it, I do it mostly on myself at this point, but it means I do healing work with a pendulum and invocation and guides. And then I now call myself a witch. I'm going to be talking about my personal journey, which is in the book, and how I went from a very broken person to somebody who has capacities and skills that I have claimed for myself, leading me to use the word witch. And there's this very specific reason that I use that word. And also want to say, when I talk about the feminine, I'm not talking about gender, because we all have masculine and feminine qualities. And we happen to live in a society that has a lot of toxic masculinity at this point running it. And a lot of what is more feminine is sort of crushed under the weight of that. So I wanted to bring that up. I'll get into that a little bit later. This is my journey, this book, of growing up in a really broken household in a broken part of the country, in a world that has a lot of problems, and how I put myself back together again and started claiming the parts of me that I didn't know were valuable, I didn't know I had, how I developed them, and how I started understanding, seeing more clearly what was happening and how I was affected by how I was raised. First, silently in your head, just note whether you identify as a witch or not, and you don't have to come out about that. And I wanted to say the working title of this book was I Am Witch, The Art of Becoming. It got changed to Love's Cauldron because I have a publisher who said you'll never sell that book with that title. When I was in my 20s, I started writing a book. I was living in Bleecker in the Bowery in New York City at the time, and I was writing a book, and my computer crashed and I lost everything. This is way, way, way back when. And so I knew it wasn't time to write a book. And over the years, I've always known I was supposed to write a book. It really was a strong feeling. But I didn't know what it was going to be. And then probably about 10 years ago, I started creating folders of, should we have this? And I started thinking about it, but it wasn't time. And then I saw a psychic, I don't know, let's say 5 years ago, I don't remember exactly when. And she said, oh, it's time to write that book. And I said, I guess I better get going. So I had been writing my whole life, and I had, computers and files and notebooks filled with writing. And I started going through it and going, well, what does any of this apply? Like, who am I? What am I doing? And I started piecing stuff together and then bridging it with new writing. And as I was writing, I became aware I was writing about the feminine that's been denied and suppressed. So that process of doing the writing, of doing the looking at everything, the writing, and the process of publishing and then talking about it really solidified what was going on. That was more vague and sort of in the ethers before. I'm going to do some reading, and this is page 37. My secret. I am a witch. This is my secret. I believe in spiritual guides, master guides, archangels. I believe in other dimensions. I believe in my inner voice. I know the voice of intuition can be developed, that it is a doorway to even greater knowing. I have kept this secret because witches have been persecuted for their knowing. But this knowing is part of my power, and it is time for it to be shared. So that is sort of just a little synopsis of what I'm doing here right now. Assuming I don't run out of time, I'm going to be talking about archetypes, and specifically the witch archetype, my history in healing, what is the shadow, and the shadow contains everything that society and or the individual represses, fears, or rejects. What is the witch and why it fits into the shadow? Reclaiming inner authority, society and the feminine, the witch wound, how healing connects to the witch, and transformation and healing that comes from descent into the underworld. So some of the things that witchy people have are connection to nature, healing knowledge, herbs, midwifery, I can't pronounce it, medicine, female autonomy, intuition and inner authority, cyclic thinking, power that comes from alignment, not force, connecting with other dimensions, channeling. It's just some of the things that are connected to that. How many people have either started reading or read Love's Cauldron? 1, 2, 3. Good. Okay. Got a couple. So if any of you have anything specific, I mean, anyone can ask anything specific, but if you have any specific questions, just let me know specifically. So, okay. What is an archetype? How many of you know what an archetype is? I would say specifically it's a structure that everyone can relate to. Everyone can relate to the idea of child, father, mother, hero, things like that. They're big psychic structures. And the witch is an archetype, and it's a specific archetype that has to do with specific things. Trickster, shadow, lover. I learned a lot about archetypes doing the tarot, but we'll get to that later. So looking at the witch archetype, wise woman, shadow, crone, integration of intuition, reclaiming rejected capacities, those have a lot to do with the witch archetype. Knowing, being a seer. And one of the things I talk about in the book is what people have done to witches, which everybody knows. It's been horrific. And I even have a piece from Wikipedia, which is pretty gruesome, about what happens when you burn someone alive. It's awful. So we're in this place where, of course, there's a witch wound, and of course, people hide qualities that they're afraid society doesn't, it won't honor and could hurt them for. A witch can often move between worlds. Can bridge conscious and unconscious, known and unknown, visible and invisible. And in myths, witches are often at the edge of the village. And that symbolizes they're often at the edge of the village or at the edge of the forest, because it's symbolizing that they live on the fringe between the mainstream and what is completely wild. So it's sort of interesting, that little tidbit. So my childhood. I grew up in a childhood where my dad was definitely the ruler, do it my way or you're out kind of a thing. My mother was very disconnected from her emotions. I was extremely sensitive. I cried constantly. And I rescued all the little animals that got dumped and hurt. And anyway, so I was called a crybaby. I was called things like that. And so my sensitivity was not honored in any way, shape, or form. And I didn't know that it was important, my sensitivity. I thought I was just this big crybaby. And if you look at the divine feminine, the undeveloped or the hurt divine feminine, that emotional type of, crying all the time, that is an unhealed feminine. And that's because of the house I grew up in. There was no support for the part of me that was sensitive. That is part of what it is to connect with other beings. Grew up in this horrible area that was very harsh to all living creatures, especially animals, which I won't go into. And I grew up in this household where it was not good to be anyone, but certainly not have feminine qualities. Despite that, me and two of my siblings read all kinds of astrology and all kinds of channel material as kids and as teenagers. So we knew, some part of us knew who we were because we got attracted to that. I'm just reading this little tiny piece. Relinquish. I went out into the world broken, and because I was not fully formed, because I was formed in a crooked way, I could not navigate. I had not developed the ability to self-navigate. I did not have the ability to say no, to choose myself first in certain areas. Career, yes. Relationship, no. My father was the one with the charisma, with power in the family, and my mother more subservient to his needs. And because of this, because of what I saw in our family, I was more attached to what was masculine rather than the feminine. I saw the power of the masculine, and so my own feminine side was present but unrecognized, unacknowledged, and unaffirmed by me. I had no real access to my deep feminine self. So I went out into the world pretty incapable of navigating and certainly holding boundaries. And I did not have the structure I needed. So that I had a lot of work to do to become who I am now. But that work also got me to start recognizing what's important in terms of the feminine. So has anyone else grown up without their feminine aspects being honored? There's a couple people. Okay. Yes, nodding. So at the age of 29, I was living in New York City, and I got into a relationship with someone who had huge addiction problems. And that relationship took me to my knees, took me to Al-Anon eventually. And that's where I started rebuilding. That was the first step for me. And I spent, I'd say, 7 years in Al-Anon before I was probably graduated. Anyway, where before I internalized all of it, a lot of it. And so what did it teach me? It got me back in my body. It got me out of my spinning mind. It got me to understand I wasn't responsible for everyone else and that there was such a thing as a higher power, meaning it wasn't all up to me. And that was crucial for me. So I started rebuilding myself. I did a lot of work of a lot of different kinds, which I won't get into. Some of it's in the book. And when I was 25, a friend of mine, I had gone to art school in Philadelphia, and she had gone to art school with me, and she gave me a tarot deck. It was a Rider-Waite, very classic. I have like 10 decks now, but it was the Rider-Waite deck, and I loved my tarot deck. And I would take it to parties and practice on people I didn't know. And my intuition opened up. That's how I opened my intuition. I learned all the archetypes, types of the major arcana. I started getting stories when I moved the cards around, when I did a spread. And I've now used the cards since 1985. So I don't know, it's around 40 years, close to around 41 years. So long time. And I'm going to read a really quick piece on the cards. This is a piece I wrote for my mother. There's a whole story in here about me and my mother that's difficult for me, but we'll read this little bit. Today would have been the 86th birthday of my mother. I sit with a friend and we pull tarot cards. We pull cards for my mother. 3, the Lovers, Judgment, 2 of Cups, all upright. I've been emotional today. I feel my mother's presence, a light breeze. She has visited me over the last 7 years. Playing with the pendulum, it sometimes behaves in a nonsensical way, and I know someone is visiting. I ask who. Sometimes Hank, who is my cat. Sometimes my mother. The Lovers, I know she loves me. She tells me. Judgment, awakening, rebirth. There is no longer a block between us. She's in a good place. She is clear to give, and I am clear to receive. 2 of Cups, happiness, relationships, love. A healing has settled. We are restored. My mother has not wandered off in this other dimension. She pays attention. She visits with love. She looks at herself, situates herself. She comes through. She is present. The skin of her limitations gone. Her energy light, warm, bright. Thank you. So that's just a quick little piece I wrote about doing a reading for my mother, who doesn't visit as often, but I feel her sometimes. And when I work with the pendulum, and sometimes I'm working with the pendulum, and it starts not like responding to what I'm asking, and I'm like, who's here? And I usually can figure out who's visiting, and I get visits from pets, past pets, and I have other occasional people who are close to me. Tarot as archetypes, which I mentioned a little earlier. The tarot, the major arcana, are archetypes. And if you study those archetypes, you'll learn a lot about what an archetype is, and you can use them to sort of scaffold meaning into, like, why did I pull the Chariot or the Justice card? What is that saying about me right now or the person I'm working with? And that's really helpful to start gaining more insight into things that we might not be conscious of, which is also what happens in SoulCollage. Does anyone, and to me, the witch cards in the tarot are the High Priestess, the Magician, the Hermit, the Moon, and the Death card. Those are all transformational cards. They're about transformation, and to me, they're witch cards. So I'm going to read one tiny little piece here. This is just sort of what witch work is to me. It's a little poem I wrote. Conjure, to summon by a sacred name, to invoke by incantation or enchantment, to bring into existence as if by magic. Scattered pieces, feelings, chapters, moments, each piece a bead, unlinked. A wild wind enters, the breath of soul, focus, intention, love. My arms reach outward, wide, the pieces coalesce, gather, pull together. A pattern emerges, the beads string, translucent greens and golds, reds, oranges, blues, and purples. Unformed becomes formed. site opens. Just a little piece about, I just want to set that up for what's here now. So I'm going to talk about soul memory discovery. So when I was doing the soul memory discovery work, and I have a binder like this filled with processes, and I don't do it for people anymore because I could pull in a lot of information, but it left me with a splitting headache. It wasn't the right work for me. But I do it for myself, my sister, or some or friends. And when I was practicing with a lot of people, I had a series of, I think 8 women came that had all had past lives where they were destroyed as witches. So one had been thrown in a well, one of them had been burnt. I mean, just horrible stories. And the way I worked with them, because I use active imagination, is I would open up the session, and then some pieces of memory would come through, and they would get it too, because we had opened up a field, so it came into them too. And so I'm going to give you a specific example after I read this one piece. Releasing trauma. Historically, intuitive women, healers, who might also be mothers or wives, old or young, could be called witches. These were often highly perceptive and sensitive women. And in parts of the world, it was men. But women it's more common, the woman thing. These were people with something to contribute to humankind. As witches, they could be persecuted, they could be tormented, thrown into a well and left to die, locked into a building and burned to death, witches on trial, hearing ugly words, witches burned at the stake. And when I was doing soul memory discovery work, I had a series of women come for sessions who had stories emerge around persecution for being suspected witches in another life. Often when we have a series of clients with a similar issue, we're working through this issue in our own lives. And I was undoubtedly trying to bring consciousness to heal past life trauma around persecution for my intuitive abilities. So I worked with this one person, and we went into that life, and she was in a kitchen, and there were herbs, and it was a very visual situation. But there was a mob of people outside her home, and they had locked her in, and I don't know the details of that, but she and her lover were locked in. Their house was burning and they couldn't leave. So we went into that life. We changed what happened, and I had them go in and hold each other and support each other as they died, instead of having them being completely in panic. And it helped her heal. So that's how you can do imaginal work. And whether it's true or not, it lives in the psyche. So even if you don't believe in past lives, it had a hook. And so you know that it was true somewhere, even if you don't believe in past lives. I think it was real, but that's, my perspective. That's interesting that we can sort of some people can access. I think anyone with help who's open and sensitive could access, but some people just can access, period. So I'm going to talk about SoulCollage briefly. So I brought some witchier cards from the SoulCollage. I have hundreds of them. I've been doing SoulCollage workshops since 2006. And I only run them once a month. I had 2 groups in LA. I have one here. And the people who come in, this is a little aside of I think a little of this is in the book, but people come in who don't know that they're creative, because people have been taught rendering is what's creative. Rendering has got nothing. That's just a hand-eye skill and a brain skill. It's not creativity necessarily, and though it can be. But so they come in and they don't know how creative they are, and they don't know how intuitive they are because they haven't been taught. And it is like creating your own personal tarot deck. And then when I work with it, we do psychodharma with the cards. We do tarot readings with the cards. I won't go into the details of how we do all that, but you can feel people starting. I mean, the people in my group are opening into way more intuition than they had, and it's probably my favorite work that I do right now. Okay. Once years ago, I tried 5-MeO DMT, which is different than straight DMT. The effects are much more powerful. Both 5-MeO DMT and DMT are found in ayahuasca, which also has other compounds and alkalines in it. And I did this with my shaman friend in LA. And what I did, I'm not going to read it all. I went straight to hell. I had what you would call a bad trip. And I was clutching onto my friend for dear life. And it was an underworld. I went straight into the underworld. And I didn't know why I went there or what, it was skeletal. There was no life, there was no light, and there was no love. It was the scariest place I've ever been. And luckily, DMT only lasts 45 minutes, an hour, that particular version, even though it felt like it was 2 days. But what happened over the years, as I processed, I lost my fear of death. Before that, I was very afraid of dying. It just was like a haunting thing. I was terrified. That trip, that horrible, horrible trip, because I was somewhere worse than what death could possibly be, my fear of death went away. And that's just an example of the gifts. The underworld has so many gifts that are, and plant medicine to me is very witchy and very much in the realm of the feminine because it's non-logical. It doesn't have to do with, 1 + 1 = 2. It's a whole different thing. And anyway, that was my DMT experience. So, okay. Sorry, everyone. I'm cracking myself up here. So the witch wound. The witch wound. We are in a society with a huge witch wound. I'm going to read this. So the divine masculine and the divine feminine. A healed masculine is purposeful, positive, decisive, order, clarity, logic, discernment, responsible, commitment, follow through. They're qualities that we need. They're structure qualities. A toxic or unhealed masculine, which is what we've got out there, is domineering, coercive, forceful, aggressive, impulsive, violent, rigid, authoritarian, isolated, doesn't have emotional literacy. And emotional literacy is really important because we're in a world now where people are doing work on emotional literacy for humans and for men, because men have the unfortunate position of not always being raised in such a way that they naturally go there. So if I've been listening to a podcast, Secure Love podcast, and Julianne, she is teaching people emotional literacy as she works with couples. And it's just amazing to watch and to hear. So then we get to the feminine. The feminine, positive, receptive strength, inner authority, empathy, compassion, attunement, inner knowing, wisdom, imagination, nurturing, flow, adaptability, sensuality, presence, versus, and this is what I was when I was young, powerlessness, self-erasure, emotional flooding, enmeshment, confusion, loss of discernment. You get the idea. So people pleasing. We're in a world where the negative masculine, not the positive is great, is crushing the feminine because there isn't space in our world for the intuitive. And so when I started working with the pendulum, I didn't tell people. I mean, close friends, yes, but hey, I use the pendulum. I've hid it for years because I didn't want to be judged. And I had this when I was in a training, intersubjectivity training for a couple of years, and one of the men wanted to be friends with me because I was talented, and he pursued me, and he was not romantically. He had a partner, and I was married, but he pursued me as a work connection. And one day I told him about my pendulum work, and he ran. I never talked to him again. He ran so far and so fast. And I realized it was a good way to get rid of people you didn't want. If we're in a culture that it's not safe to be yourself, then you hide. And that is part of the witch wound. Like, you could tell people, oh, I'm this, that, and the other, and you could lose. Someone might say, you could destroy part of your life. So the witch wound means we hide parts of ourselves or don't develop parts of ourselves because it's not socially sanctioned. And we are in a world with a big witch wound because logic rules, and 1 + 1 = 2, and you pay attention to the stock market and like all this stuff that has nothing to do with our intuitive selves, these other parts of ourselves that are valuable. So I'm reading the Chalice and the Blade, which have you read that? Yeah, I'm only 25% through, but I'm reading it, and I'm like, I needed to read this a while ago, but I'm reading it finally. So 10,000 BCE to about 4,000 BCE, we had egalitarian societies. We didn't have the big disparity between the masculine and we didn't have the hierarchy between the male and the female. Then around 4000 BCE up till, I think, till 1000 BCE, things started changing. We had invaders coming in from other areas, and a lot of what was beautiful in the world got destroyed. And that's when slavery happened. That's when women became subjugated. And then if you look at our myths, like Adam and Eve, well, that myth, story, whatever you want to call it, hopefully none of you are highly religious, that is a putting down, even though it represents a lot of different things, it is also a putting down of the feminine, that the feminine was responsible. And that served the purposes of what was going on at that time. So we have a lot of stories. We have stories that aren't like that, but there are stories that are set up that very specifically blame the feminine for whatever's going on. And that pisses me off, but that's a whole nother story. Have you read it? Yeah. It's really interesting. I had no idea there were people out there doing research on all that. And because common knowledge doesn't go there. People don't know. I had a conversation with someone a few years ago, and she's like, yeah, back in the matriarchal days. I said, were there ever any matriarchal days? That's before I read the book. But it wasn't exactly matriarchal. It was partially. It was, I mean, who knows exactly what. So the land might go through the man would move into the female's family's house instead of the other way around. Okay, I want to read this end thing in the epilogue. Finding home. The witch flies into the unfathomable dark sky, a sky of stardust, comets, and universes, breathing, pulsing as she swirls through the air. She is at home in her flight, at home in her embodiment, connected to the great wild being that holds us all. She shrieks her delight. This book was so big, it was 700 some pages, that it is 2 books. And I'm going to start, the second is written, but it's not typeset, which I'm going to start working on soon, hopefully. I didn't know I was writing a book about this. And the reason I use the word witch is because it's been thrown into the shadows. It's been demonized. And I'm like, how do we pick the word up and make it okay? Make these qualities that are attached to it okay? And so as I was writing the book, the word, it kept coming back to me. Oh, I'm writing about the feminine. I'm writing about the witch. But when I started, I didn't know that's what I was writing about. As I was working with the material, I started realizing I'm going to use the word witch. I didn't have to use the word witch, but it felt like it would help people who help me and help people who could grab onto it and say, well, I'm not just intuitive. I actually am. I have my own authority. I'm claiming these different parts of myself that have been not supported when those qualities that haven't been supported, and a lot of them align with the witch. It's so hard to tell the intensity of the times, and we've got the rise of the toxic masculine and the rise of the witch at the same time, because there's a lot of people, I think, who are like Orcas Island. You do the witch paddle. I did the witch paddle a couple years ago. It was fun. All these people show up in their little pointy hats, and we go paddle boarding, and I was like, oh. And this is a place that is very open to that kind of thing. I know a lot of people working with the feminine in terms of body or sexuality and that kind of thing, which is great. So I do think it's opening, but I also think there's parts of the world where they still kill people who are accused of being witches. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and these are often people who aren't, they're nothing unusual. I mean, they can see visions, maybe they have strong intuitions, they can heal, but they get blamed for, the cattle died down the road and you did it and we're going to kill you. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Yeah. But I mean, we are in a world where there's great polarization, obviously. And I don't know. My attitude in terms of hopefulness and not hopeful shifts daily. Yeah. We vilified part of it. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, because I do some videos on TikTok and on YouTube, and I occasionally get these comments that are like, I get a lot of good positive stuff, but occasionally I get comments about, well, witches are evil. What are you talking about? And I'm like, oh my God. So, it's like, there is that consciousness of, you know what I mean? Right. No, they're humans with skill. To me, it's a capacity or a skill. So if you're a witch, it means you are honoring, you've developed certain capacities or skills that maybe Joe at the hardware store hasn't developed. It doesn't mean he couldn't develop them. He doesn't know he can develop them because he's not been in a world where people have said, hey, let's talk about your feelings. Let's talk about your intuition. How do we support that? I mean, some people come in, like I had I have a good friend, I had a good friend in grad school who was one of the most psychic people I've ever met in my life. I mean, like amazing. She just came in with that. Not everyone does. Some of us have to, lift weights or do something specific to gain what we want to gain. Right. There's a bell curve. And if you're lucky to be on one end, it happens easier than if you're on the other end, which doesn't mean it's impossible. This book is about healing the disowned. It is about my journey, and it's bigger than just my journey. If you want to find me, I'm at jenniferlehrmft.com. That's my website. If you want to look at the SoulCollage cards, they're really cool. I love them. I love my cards. I love everyone's cards. People come in and make cards, and everyone is blown away by what everyone's made because nobody realized what talent they were surrounded by. And that to me is incredible. Like people come in and they're like, oh my God, look what I did and look what you did. It's just, and it's working in the unconscious is telling us what to pick. And then when you work with it, it goes right into something you need to work on in yourself. So to me, that connects with all this. And I also might start doing work with people around images and cards. That's sort of, at this point, I think that's where I want to go in terms of working with people. And yeah, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for coming.